Peneda-Gerês National Park, the only national park in Portugal. It's an area of almost 700 square kilometres, located in the far north of the country, on the border with Spain. The national park was founded in 1971 to protect the flora and fauna on the Iberian Peninsula. This includes Garrano ponies. They're the only breed of horse in Europe that still lives in the wild. Duarte Figueiredo is Regional Director of the ICNF. The ICNF is responsible for the management and protection of the Peneda-Gerês National Park. Park rangers make sure that the laws of the park are respected. The protection of the Garrano ponies is one of their tasks.
The Garranos are a native breed of horse from the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. This species integrates very harmoniously into the ecological balance here. They are not wild animals, but rather the horses have been domesticated. These animals live in the wild, but have an owner. The horses live in herds, but the owners have marked all the animals with a chip, and they receive support from the EU to preserve an original breed.
The
owners go to the herd once or twice a year, catch the ponies, mark the foals, and then let them run free again.
The Garrano ponies are a very old breed of horse. They have been found in this region of Portugal for at least 20,000 years. The Garranos have adapted very well to the rough and barren mountain landscape in the national park. They're small but very robust and hardy, and climb with as much confidence as mountain goats. They also don't mind the climatic weather, with hot summers and cold winters in northern Portugal. Between 200 and 300 of them live in the park.
The park is located in a very special place in Portugal and on the Iberian Peninsula. We are at a boundary between Mediterranean and Atlantic biotopes. At just below 700 square kilometers, it's actually a relatively small park, but because of its special soil composition, there are many different landforms and habitats here.
Barren and rocky mountain ridges in the plateaus contrast with large forests and lush ground vegetation in the deep valleys, interspersed with crystal-clear lakes and rivers. Quaint and desolate villages with terraced fields are also part of the landscape of the national park, as are the large and small granite stones that have been exposed by erosion and can be found everywhere. Miguel Dantas da Gama has made his hobby his life's work. He has been travelling through the national park for many years, observing and documenting the development of flora and fauna. He knows the park like no other.
This is the centre of the national park. This is the epitome of a nature reserve. Behind me stretches the former glacial valley of the Rio Homem, and there are the best preserved old oak forests in the park.
Mata de Albergaria is the name of this nature reserve, a well-preserved original oak forest in the middle of the Peneda-Gerês National Park. It's the only area that is state-owned and managed and protected by the ICNF.
This is a real oak forest, but an oak forest doesn't only consist of oaks. The oak species are only the basis. At lower altitude, it's mainly the English oak that grows. At higher altitudes, it's the Pyrenean oak. The oak forests are the original forests in the national park. There is a great variety of plants here in the oak forest. Ferns, climbing plants on the trees, and on the ground, cranberries and moss. The diversity of species is what makes this forest special. As in the oak forest, light always falls through the treetops onto the lower areas. This allows shrubs and ground plants to grow.
Due to the trees and the dense ground vegetation, the oak forests produce a lot of moisture and store more water in the soil. As a result, it's a cooler temperature. The plants do not dry out as quickly, and the risk of forest fires is much lower. Paula Oliveira spent part of her childhood living with her grandmother in Cabril, in the south of the national park, and returned from the city 4 years ago. Due to the financial crisis, she lost her job and had a hard time in her private life. She decided to leave everything behind, start a new life in Cabril, and dedicate herself to new projects. One of them is the production of flax.
This is the 4th year I've grown flax with my own flax seeds. I haven't been able to make any fabric yet because it is such a labor-intensive process. Until 40 years ago, a lot of flax was grown here in Cabril and Montalegre. But when other materials appeared that were cheaper, flax was no longer planted.
People used flax to produce a fabric from which they made sheets, towels, and summer clothing. After picking, the flax must soak in water for 8 to 9 days to soften.
This place has always meant freedom in my childhood. In the city, I was not allowed to go to the beach alone. But here, I could go to the river alone, play in the water, run across the fields and pick flowers. This feeling of freedom has always stayed with me.
Even when Paula lived in the city, she spent a lot of time with her grandmother in Cabril during the holidays.
The flax must be beaten again and again so that it becomes nice and soft.
Then the flax is hit on a wooden board.
And finally, it's brushed over here to pull out larger impurities and make the flax silkier and cleaner. This is the right flax now, and it feels clean and soft in the hand.
1 meter of this fabric would be very expensive because the production process is so time-consuming. Paula could not make a living from it, but she has an idea to build up a form of adventure tourism here that is oriented towards the traditions of the old villages in the national park.
I've taken up a legacy here, something that no longer seems to make any sense at all. something that has been left behind. From this, I will build something that has a lot of value for me.
She gets help for her projects from Maria, who's familiar with the traditions and happy to pass on her knowledge to Paula.
I work with many older people who master this rural life with great sacrifice and effort and take up traditions that were a way of life in their own right and then disappeared. You don't want me to carry the thread to the end?
No, you can't do that. Put your hand further down, like this.
That far down?
Yes, that works better. I always do it like this.
You're right, it works better.
Maria shows Paula how to make clothes from linen with a loom.
All the people here in the village used to weave, and we made everything out of linen. Everyone had a loom in the house. Now nobody has one, except us. They made firewood from their looms. We are the last ones who still have one.
And Maria is still using it. She shows Paula her newly finished linen pieces.
The fact that I live in the only national park in Portugal also brings responsibility for me. I feel an obligation to keep the roots of this region alive.
Portugal's only official national park was established in 1971 before the democratization of the country. But unlike other national parks, Peneda-Gerês is partly inhabited. Around 10,000 people live here together in villages.
One of the big challenges in Portugal is the fact that very few forests are state-owned. And because so much of the Peneda-Gerês National Park is private, we state representatives must have a great willingness for discussion in order to come to agreements with the landowners, their representatives, the mayors, and all other forces.
Out of an area of 696 square kilometres, only about 53 square kilometres of the park are state-owned. The remaining area is privately or collectively owned by the surrounding villages, which use the area for agriculture or for their animals to graze. This is the case for the goat herd Paulo Landeira. For generations, his village in Ermida, in the south of the park, has used the common area of the nearby mountain for their goats.
The goats are all descended from the animals my grandparents already had. But the herd renews itself naturally. We slaughter the old goats and sell the meat. Some young goats stay.
The herd currently comprises about 200 goats. They belong to 3 breeders. Every day they take turns walking the goats about 25 kilometres up the mountain above their village. According to old tradition, 1 shepherd per 20 goats must spend 1 day in the mountains. Paulo owns 100 goats, so 5 days a week he walks with his goats.
I like nature. I like walking around in the mountains. It's quiet. Nobody gets on my nerves there. I hike, take breaks, and take my food with me. But sometimes I want to rest, of course. Walking up there every day would be pretty hard. But if I didn't have any colleagues, I'd probably have to. The other 2 goat herds are quite old. I'll probably do it alone one day.
To protect themselves from wild animals, Paolo and the herd are accompanied by 4 dogs into the mountains. One of them is a young Castro Laborero. This breed originally comes from the village of the same name in the north of the park and is still bred there.
This is a dog that's here to protect the goats. He doesn't hurt anyone. He's a nice dog. But when wild animals sneak up on the herd, he goes after them.
The Iberian wolf is one of the inhabitants of the national park. 5 to 6 packs are currently at home here. The wolf packs have grown in number while there is less and less natural prey for the wolf in the park. As a consequence, the wolves have started to attack herds of cattle, horses and goats. Especially in winter, the risk of an attack is high. Last winter, Paolo lost 20 goats to the wolves.
The wolf is a protected species, and only those who have animals lose them to the wolves. Those who don't have any don't lose them. The people, the politicians, don't know what the life of a goat herd is like. They should take a look at what it's like here, when at the end of the day you're standing in front of 4 or 5 dead animals that the wolf has killed. Who pays for that? Nobody. We would have to do the same with the wolf as they did in the past. When the wolf attacked too many animals, they would go on a wolf hunt.
The Fojo dos Lobos in the national park is one of the best preserved wolf traps in the Iberian Peninsula. A huge stone structure ending in a stone circle with a pit into which the wolf was typically driven. The hunt at that time required the expertise of an entire village and a goat as a lure. Armed hunters drove the wolves to the Fojo, where men were waiting, ready to shoot. Since the beginning of the 20th century, these traps have no longer been used.
There are animals in the mountains like wild goats that get sick and infect the goats from my herd. And for that we need the wolf. He hunts the sick goat and eats it. This protects the herd from the disease. The wolf is important. But maybe we don't need so many wolves.
In the evening, the goats return to their pens, satiated. In the past, there were mainly sheep and goat herders who made local herd walks with their animals. This was harmless to the vegetation in the park. The goats are even useful eaters.
It's different today. The animals kept in the park are now mainly cattle and horses, which remain unaccompanied in the mountains all year round, and they graze everywhere. This destroys the vegetation.
Miguel is a cattle breeder. For generations, his family has bred a cross between Barossa and Limousin cattle. They belong to the typical cattle breeds of the country, small-bodied and tough cattle that are bred for their meat. Every day, Miguel takes his cattle to graze on the plateau in the morning and brings them back to the barn in the evening. He's been doing this since he was 10 years old.
The cattle go down here now, then they come back up. They choose what they want to eat.
The high plateau in the north of the park, directly on the Spanish border, belongs to the local communities.
I do this every day. I get up and go to work until I lie down again in the evening, and then get up again. This is the life of the sad man, the life of the poor man, because the rich man doesn't work.
Many cattle live freely on the high plateaus in the north of the national park during the spring and summer months. This form of grazing has profound consequences. Horses and cattle graze everywhere, destroying vegetation and the nesting sites of many bird species. Forest fires are the biggest threat to national and nature parks. Every year, especially in the summer months, there are many small and some larger fires in the Peneda-Gerês and its surroundings. Even small fires are fought with great effort to prevent them from spreading and getting out of control. In recent years, more effort has been invested in fighting forest fires. The ICNF now has its own unit to control the fires. Fire regulations have been tightened to prevent forest fires.
The forests were already in a poor state beforehand. The fire destroyed very large areas and left only barren landscapes with a flat ground cover.
Most recently, in 2016, a huge forest fire with several fire fronts spread through a mountain range in the Peneda-Gerês National Park. Large areas of forest were destroyed. There are many reasons for the fires. A significant part is due to negligence. Discarded cigarettes or broken glass that focus the light are typical triggers for forest fires. 30% of fires are deliberately set to gain grazing land. Instead of hard-to-burn native trees, such as the English oak, combustible trees, such as eucalyptus or acacia, were planted to repopulate the forest faster, causing fires to rapidly spread.
This is the silver acacia, the famous false mimosa, which was also cultivated as an ornamental plant. We even had festivals here dedicated to this plant. The problem is this plant quickly adapts to its surroundings. The plants are so close together that they prevent a slower growing plant from thriving. When the trees are burnt down after a forest fire, the silver acacia immediately grows back through the roots.
This has caused native tree species, such as oak, to be rarely found in some areas. They're being displaced by acacias and other exotic species.
There are already a few areas that are recovering noticeably, and a lot has been done in recent years to contain the forest fires. Also by having more people to take care of it. But we need to protect more areas and prohibit access to these protected zones for grazing animals.
The oak forest is home to numerous reptiles and amphibians, such as the Iberian frog, which is exclusive to the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. Rare plant species can also be found here.
This is a symbolic plant of the Jesh mountains. You can see that from the name. Hypericum Jesh. It's a St. John's wort plant that comes from this region and can be used to make very good tea that cures various diseases. This St. John's wort is one of about 800 plants that can be found in the national park.
200 vertebrates and 170 bird species are native to the Peneda-Gerês National Park. Many habitats of flora and fauna are unique. It's the only national park in Portugal to receive financial support from the government and EU funds to protect these habitats. Since 2009, Peneda-Gerês National Park has also been a protected UNESCO biosphere reserve. The park's location, at the boundary between the Mediterranean and Atlantic biotopes, is one of the regions with the most rainfall in Portugal. There are numerous waterfalls and rivers in the park, which fill the lakes with water, even during the hot summers. At the foot of the forest lies the village of Jesh, which was already known for its thermal baths before the establishment of the national park. This is where the aristocracy met to hunt big game in the mountains. For 3 generations, the Van Zeller family has held the rights to use the medicinal water springs. Rosario Van Zeller is also the owner and manager of a spa hotel in Jesh.
In the past, it was mainly the nobility and the upper middle classes who came to Jesh. They came here to spend their summer holidays. This is where the tradition comes from that the thermal baths are mainly used in summer.
Today, mostly tourists come to Jesh to use the healing water from the ancient spring and combine it with a visit to the national park. The water is very rich in sodium and is excellent for treating diabetes, high blood pressure and obesity.
The Romans must have already discovered the thermal water, because when excavations were carried out here in the 20th century, Roman coins were discovered.
Traces of Roman settlement can be found in several areas of the park. Remains of an old Roman road, path markers and bridges, but also aqueducts from the more recent past, such as these old water pipes built by villagers around 1930 to supply their potato fields with water. In many villages you can also find espigueiros, old grain or maize barns. These were erected with the introduction of maize cultivation to protect the grain against rats, mice and rot. First made of wood, they were later built of the weather-resistant granite. The ruins of one of the oldest castles in Portugal are located in the village of Castro Laboreiro, in the very north of the Peneda-Gerês National Park, right on the border with Spain. Nearby is Pontes, a small, old and abandoned village that once served as a winter residence for families. 8 to 10 families lived here. In the past, it was common for the mountain people to live in 2 separate villages. In summer, in an upper village, often above 1,000 meters. The rest of the year was usually spent in a river valley, in a winter village, because it got too cold in the upper villages, and the cattle couldn't find much to eat. With modern construction and transport technology, the use of winter villages was abandoned. People moved their lives completely to the summer villages and did not return to their winter homes. The villages gradually disappeared.
The village was in a pitiful state. Everything was full of thick bushes and undergrowth, and brambles were growing on the paths. I could hardly get into the village, only via a small path.
Manuel Rodrigues spent the winter months of his childhood here in this village. His family was one of the last inhabitants.
Some houses had collapsed, the walls on the ground like the crumbled house back there.
Manuel's great-aunts lived in this house, with whom he had spent a lot of time as a child. He has many fond memories of this house and this village.
Here in the middle was the fire. We sat down on the bench. Above the fire was an iron pot with 3 legs. The bench was here. We cooked on the fire. I was very sad when I saw this decay. I always found this village with the winter houses much more beautiful than the other one where we lived in summer. Pontes was my passion, not the other village. My chest tightened when I saw this. One day I said to my son, how about we restore this house? And that's what we did, with very little money.
For 4 years, Manuel has been gradually restoring the houses. On weekends, his son Bruno comes from the city to help him. The desire to rebuild the village gave rise to the idea of using the restored village for tourists.
We don't want mass tourism here. This should be for people who are looking for nature and tranquility, who want to hike and enjoy the river. That's why we want everything to remain sustainable. It's better to grow a little slower and not destroy everything in the process.
Até que nos permita fazer as coisas devagar e não estragar tudo.
Sonia Almeida is from the organisation ADERE, which is responsible for the regional development of the park and works on the development of the hiking routes in the park.
We have compiled the major hiking routes based on many other paths. A long path that has existed, small sections of paths, but also the old paths that shepherds or pilgrims have always used. We've created these walking routes for people who want to enjoy nature, who are looking for peace and quiet, and who like the river rushing by.
Investments are to be made in the park's expansion over the next few years, as this form of tourism does not harm the national park and its ecosystems.
The shrine of Our Lady of Peneda is very important in religious terms for the people who live in the villages in the national park. Some even come from very far away.
Every year from the 31st of August to the 8th of September, a religious festival is held here. People from villages across the national park make the pilgrimage.
Podem encontrar aqui um círculo.
I'm going to ask you right now to either close your eyes or point them at the floor in the way that is most comfortable for you. But before that, I ask you to look all around and notice where you are.
Podemos levar a atenção para dentro do corpo e simplesmente chegar.
Maria do Carmo offers people a different form of recreation in the national park. She practices Shirin Yoku, translated perceiving the forest through its senses, or forest bathing in short, a therapy that originated in Japan.
Our biology is made to be in nature. We've moved away from that. So this therapy wants to teach us again what we always had and knew. This therapy has helped me recover from my own burnout, so I know that it works. And there are so many people in the world who experience burnout.
Research shows that spending time in the forest lowers blood pressure and reduces stress hormones.
I felt that I needed more wilderness for forest bathing, an untouched environment. In forest therapy, it is always said, the forest is the therapist, and we only open the doors.
Maria wants to help the people who come to her to pause, to reflect, and to find a piece of themselves again. The ICNF, together with the landowners of the park, tries to promote tourism and at the same time regulate it so that nature does not suffer any damage. However, there are parts of the park that have already reached breaking point with the existing tourism.
Tourism naturally puts a strain on nature. Here in the national park, you can feel it particularly at certain points. For example, here at this well-known viewpoint. This area around the old thermal bath and Jesh is simply very popular, also because there is water here. And that's what attracts people in the summer.
The Vilarinho das Fornas Dam is located on the southwestern edge of the Peneda-Gerês National Park. It was built in 1972 to transform the Rio Homem into a reservoir and generate electricity. An old village on the edge of the river, which gave the dam its name, was sacrificed and flooded. 300 people lived here. Manuel Antunes and Antonio Barroso also lived in this village.
Eles já mudaram desde aí para cá.
I was outraged, especially because the people were not really compensated. The electricity company gave us half an escudo for a square metre of land. At that time, a sardine already cost 1 escudo. All in all, the whole village got the equivalent of maybe 100,000 euros. It would have been worth much more, of course.
The village was a close-knit community that managed itself. Due to the construction of the reservoir, the village community was torn apart and dispersed to the surrounding villages. However, people still come together for meetings today.
We meet, then eat braised goat together, and are happy to be together. We were practically one big family here.
Porque nós era tudo uma família.
The remains of the village are still visible today. In times of low rainfall, the village ruins even peep out of the water.
When the water level drops, I like to walk through the ruins to my parents' house and remember the old days. Of course, the divers find it nice when there's a lot of water in the dam because they want to dive through the village. And that's when I had the idea of making an underwater museum out of it.
There are over 100 small villages in the park where old values and traditions are still preserved and practiced. Tourreim, located on the northern edge of the national park on the river Salash, is an original community village. Paulo Barroso was the head of the village of Tourreim for 20 years and runs a small business in the village, like his father before him. Jaime Barroso was a farmer. In addition, he worked for Paulo's father, who in the early 1980s offered the people of Tourreim an alternative to earn good money on the side. He organized a smuggling business from Tourreim across the border to Spain.
Remember when we were over the castle, lying down to rest, and then the wolves started howling?
Sure, I was scared.
I was really scared and wanted to run away, but then we would have lost the smuggled goods.
Exactly, and our money, which we would have earned. Either we would have turned back or we would have had to ignore the wolves.
Of course, on the way there, we only thought about the police.
Back then, it was all about the wolves.
Exactly. I felt this special atmosphere in the evenings as a child. At dinner, everyone was nervous, and all they could think about was smuggling. But my father wouldn't let me for a long time because I was too small.
Smuggling between Portugal and Spain was necessary for many people in the border villages to make a living until the 1980s. Although the authoritarian regimes of Portugal and Spain maintained a political friendship, the borders remained sealed. What was available was smuggled: coffee, honey, clothes, but also televisions, mattresses, and even car engines that came from Germany.
I remember when jeans became a popular smuggled product. In Spain, there was money, but no product. That was our chance. I went to a factory in Porto during the day and bought the jeans. At night, I brought them across the border with 5 or 6 colleagues. 30 jeans in a sack, all night long.
Often we were already very tired in the evening from working in the fields. At that time, we still harvested and processed the grain with our hands. That was hard work. But when we went out again in the evening to smuggle, we were happy because it was an important extra income for us.
With 2 to 3 hours of smuggling, we earned more money than if we had worked all day.
Over there on that mountain is the border. Do you remember that place?
So many times it's happened there.
To avoid being caught by the police, the men walked about 6 kilometres alongside roads to the border, most often carrying heavy loads. With the joint accession of both countries to the European Community in 1986, illegal trade came to a halt.
We're here in the middle of the Peneda-Gerês National Park. If you want to enter the park from Spain, you go straight through Turin. The people who live here do so primarily out of passion and because they like nature. Because living in the park also has its limitations. We can't just build a house the way we want to. We have to respect nature and the rules of the park. We try to actively manage the ecosystems. We want to rebuild natural park areas that have been neglected and actually have much greater natural potential. We have invested a lot in recent years to save endangered ecosystems.
And with success, original vegetation has returned in some areas. Animal species that have higher habitat requirements and had become endangered or even extinct are again increasingly found in the park.
Until a few years ago, there were 2 breeding pairs of golden eagles here. Unfortunately, because the human impact was too intense, they died out. Now they're coming back because of a nature conservation project in the neighboring region of Galicia that is reintroducing the eagles. In these rocky slopes, the barren cliffs there, golden eagles have nested. And on this side too. The golden eagles can now be seen more often again. Curiously, they sometimes nest in the same places where golden eagles used to nest. I've seen them actually use the exact same spot on the same cliff as the animals that lived here 40 or 50 years ago. That's really great. It's not only my passion. I have become someone for whom this hobby has almost become the meaning of life. It's my main activity. Because I believe that there is still a lot to do and to recover in this important nature reserve. Peneda-Gerês is, after all, our only national park in Portugal.
Peneda-Gerês, o nosso único parque nacional.